Woman pleads, "Buy my old land," but the millionaire discovers a hidden secret there. Michael Thomas Anderson adjusted his tie knot as he watched the elderly woman standing for hours at the entrance of the office building. Her trembling hands held a yellowed envelope, and her simple clothes contrasted with the flow of executives coming and going. When he finally stepped out of his imported car, the woman approached hesitantly. Tears streaked her wrinkled face as she extended the papers toward him. "Please, sir, you need to hear me out," she said, her voice choked. "I know you buy land. This has belonged to my family for over 50 years. Michael Thomas paused for a moment, studying the woman who seemed to have endured many hardships. Normally he would ignore such an approach, but something in her desperation made him hesitate. "Ma'am, you should go to a real estate agency." "I don't do business like this on the street," he replied, already heading toward the building entrance. "Sir, please," she insisted, following him. "I really need the money. It's for a treatment. It's urgent. You're my only hope." The businessman stopped again. In his 43 years, he had built a real estate empire precisely because he knew how to recognize opportunities. And there was something about those yellowed papers that piqued his professional curiosity. "How much do you want for this land?" he asked, turning to face her. "Whatever you think is fair," she answered quickly, wiping her tears. "I just need enough money to help someone very special to me." Michael Thomas reached for the documents. As he touched them, he felt the paper was old but well preserved. The address indicated a remote area of Chicago, a place he knew well from his investments. "Listen, ma'am. What's your name?" "Margaret." "Margaret Walker," she replied, drying her face with a cloth handkerchief. "Mrs. Margaret, I'll take a look at these papers. If everything's in order, I can visit the land tomorrow morning. But I'm not promising anything, understood?" The woman's eyes shone with hope for the first time that afternoon. She gripped his hands tightly, as if making sure this wasn't a dream. "Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. You won't regret it. I promise." The next morning, Michael Thomas drove his car down the dirt roads leading to the property. Margaret was waiting there, wearing the same clothes as the day before, but now with a scarf on her head, shielding her from the harsh sun. The land was larger than he had imagined. An old house stood there, clearly abandoned for years, with exposed brick walls and a red clay roof. Vegetation had overtaken much of the space, but it was clear this had once been a home. "My family lived here for a long time," Margaret explained, walking beside him. "My mother was born in this house, so was I. This is where I learned to cook, to tend the vegetable garden." Michael Thomas assessed the place with a businessman's eye. The area had development potential. It was in a neighborhood that was starting to gain value. But something else caught his attention, a strange sense of familiarity he couldn't explain. "Why do you want to sell?" he asked as they walked around the house. Margaret hesitated before answering. Her hands fidgeted nervously with the hem of her beige cardigan. "Like I said, I need money for a treatment. It's for someone very important to me, someone I should have taken better care of over the years." They walked in silence for a few minutes. Michael Thomas was paying attention to the details of the property, mentally calculating its market value when he stumbled on a loose stone near the back of the house. "Be careful, sir," said Margaret, holding his arm. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing." As he bent down to check if he was hurt, Michael Thomas noticed the stone wasn't just loose. It seemed to have been placed there deliberately, like some kind of marker. When he moved it completely, it revealed a small patch of darker soil, as if something had been buried there recently. "Mrs. Margaret, what is this?" he asked, pointing to the spot. The woman visibly paled. Her hands began trembling more intensely, and she took a few steps back. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered. But over the years, Michael Thomas had developed a sharp instinct for detecting when someone was lying. And at that moment, he was certain Margaret knew exactly what was buried there. "You won't tell me the truth," he pressed, now fully focused on the mystery. Margaret looked around as if checking no one else was nearby. Then, with a deep sigh, she stepped closer again. "If you promise to buy the land, "I'll tell you everything," she said, her voice barely audible. "That depends on what you have to tell me." With shaking hands, Margaret began digging into the soil with her bare nails. Michael Thomas was surprised by the determination of the elderly woman, who seemed to summon strength she hadn't shown before. After a few minutes, she pulled out a rusted metal box about the size of a shoebox. It had clearly been there for many years, but was still preserved enough to be opened. "Open it," she urged, holding the box out to him. Michael Thomas hesitated. There was something about Margaret's behavior that made him uneasy. She wouldn't look directly at him, and her hands kept trembling in a way that seemed beyond normal nerves. When he opened the box, the first thing he saw were old black and white photographs, yellowed with time. In them, a young woman held a baby in her arms, smiling at the camera. The resemblance between the young woman and Margaret was striking. "Who is this woman?" he asked. "My sister Catherine," Margaret replied, tears now streaming down her face. She passed away many years ago." Michael Thomas kept sifting through the papers inside the box. There were letters, old documents, and then his hand froze. He pulled out a yellowed birth certificate and felt the world spin around him. The name on the document read, Michael Thomas Walker, born March 15, 1980, the same date as his birthday. But the parents' names were completely different from those he'd known his whole life. "What is this?" he asked, his voice strained. "What does this mean?" Margaret could no longer meet his gaze. She turned away and began sobbing uncontrollably. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she wept. "I just wanted to sell the land and get the money for Robert's treatment." "Who is Robert? And why is my name on this document?" The woman slowly turned to face him. Her eyes were red, but her expression held a mix of relief and terror. "Robert is your father," she said weakly. "Your real father. And I'm your aunt." The silence that followed seemed to last an eternity. Michael Thomas felt his heart racing as he tried to process what he was hearing. For all these years he had believed that his parents were Richard and Barbara Anderson, the couple who raised him and gave him every opportunity in life. "This is impossible," he murmured. "My parents are Richard and Barbara. They told me how I was born, how I was planned." "They lied to you," interrupted Margaret, "just as they lied to us all these years." Michael Thomas sat on a nearby rock, trying to gather his thoughts. The box was still in his hands and he could feel the weight of decades of secrets being revealed. "Tell me everything," he said, looking straight at her. "From the beginning." Margaret took a deep breath and began to tell a story she had kept hidden for over 40 years. "Catherine, my sister, fell in love with Robert when she was just 17. He was a good, hard-working young man, but poor. His family had nothing, just like ours. When she got pregnant, our parents were desperate." "Go on," urged Michael Thomas, absorbing every word. "Back then, a pregnancy out of wedlock was a terrible shame for a family. Our parents hid Catherine here in this house throughout her pregnancy. Robert only found out he was going to be a father a few weeks before the birth." As Margaret told the story, Michael Thomas began to understand the magnitude of the secret that had been kept from him. His entire life had been built on a lie. "What happened when I was born?" "Catherine had complications during childbirth. She didn't make it," said Margaret, pausing to steady her emotions. "Before she passed, she made Robert promise to find a good family to raise you. And my adoptive parents? How did they get involved?" "Richard and Barbara Anderson were already wealthy back then, but they couldn't have children. They had tried legal adoption for years, but there was always some problem. When they heard through a middleman that there was a baby available, they offered a lot of money." Michael Thomas felt anger rising in his chest. The idea that his life had essentially been bought made him sick. "How much did they pay?" $15,000, replied Margaret, lowering her head. It was a lot of money back then. Robert was desperate, out of work, with no means to raise a child alone. "And you agreed?" "Robert didn't want to, but I convinced him," she admitted, her voice heavy with guilt. "I said it was better for you, that you'd have opportunities we could never give you." Michael Thomas stood abruptly, pacing back and forth. Anger, confusion, and sadness swirled inside him in a way he had never experienced.
Where is he now? Where's Robert? In a nursing home in Naperville, answered Margaret. He had a stroke 2 years ago. That's why I need the money from the land.
The medications are expensive and he needs surgery. And all these years, none of you tried to contact me. Margaret hesitated before answering, and Michael Thomas sensed there were more secrets to uncover. We tried, she finally said, several times. What do you mean you tried? Robert wrote letters to you for years. I also tried calling, looking for you. But your adoptive parents always blocked any contact. That's impossible. They never told me about any letters or calls. Margaret walked to a nearby tree and began digging again, this time in an area marked by small stones arranged in a circle. From there, she pulled out a plastic bag containing more documents. Here are copies of some of the letters Robert sent you over the years, she said, handing him the bag, and also proof that your adoptive parents received them. Michael Thomas opened the bag with trembling hands. There were dozens of letters, all addressed to him but clearly never delivered. The dates ranged from when he was 5 years old up until the previous year. He opened one of the most recent letters and began to read. My dear son, Michael Thomas, today you turn 42. As I do every year, I write this letter even though I know you may never read it. I wonder how you are, if you're happy, if you've started a family. Margaret tells me you've become a successful businessman, and that fills me with pride even though I can't share that pride with you. If one day you do read this letter, I want you to know that not a single day goes by without me thinking of you. The decision to let you go was the hardest of my life, but I always believed it was what was best for you. Your mother, Catherine, made me promise you would grow up knowing love. I hope the Andersons kept that promise. With all my love, Robert Walker, your father. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just getting started. Now, continuing, tears began streaming down Michael Thomas's face as he read the letter. His entire life he had wondered about his origins, especially since he never felt fully connected to Richard and Barbara, despite all the upbringing and opportunities they had given him. Why did you keep these letters here, he asked. Because Robert always hoped that one day you'd come looking for your roots, Margaret answered. He said that when you were ready, fate would bring you to us. Michael Thomas kept flipping through the letters. There were photos of him at different ages, clearly taken from a distance, at public events or leaving his office building. He now realized he had been watched for years without knowing. Were you following me? We weren't. But Robert always wanted to know how you were doing. Margaret would go into the city sometimes just to see you from afar. She said it helped Robert feel better. The revelation that his birth family had been watching him for years gave Michael Thomas a strange feeling. On one hand, he felt violated. On the other, there was something comforting in knowing there were people who cared about him in a way he'd never known. I need to see him, he finally said. I need to meet Robert. Are you sure? Margaret asked. He's very frail. It might be too much of a shock for him. 43 years is too long, Michael Thomas replied, tucking the letters into his pocket. I lost my entire childhood and youth without knowing my real father. And your adoptive parents. Do they know you're here? Michael Thomas paused. Richard and Barbara Anderson had always been controlling people who liked to know his every move. For years he believed it was care and protection. Now he was starting to understand it might have been something darker. They don't know anything, he answered. And for now, I'll keep it that way. Michael Thomas, there's one thing I haven't told you yet, Margaret said hesitantly. More secrets. Your adoptive parents. They didn't just intercept the letters. They also paid us to stay silent all these years. The anger Michael Thomas felt in that moment was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. It was a mix of betrayal, humiliation, and outrage that made his whole body tremble. What do you mean by that? Every month, all these years, we received money from the Andersons. Not much, but enough to survive. In exchange, we had to promise never to reach out to you. And you agreed? We had no choice, Margaret said, her voice full of shame. Robert was always unemployed, and I took care of him and our elderly mother. Without that money, we would have gone hungry. Michael Thomas walked away from her, feeling betrayed from all sides. The parents who raised him had lied to him for decades. His biological family had accepted money to keep their distance. His entire life seemed to have been an elaborate lie. How long did this go on? Until last year, admitted Margaret. When Robert had the stroke, the payments stopped. I guess they thought we weren't a threat anymore. And that's why you came to me now? No, she said quickly. I mean, the money is missed, but that's not why. Robert is very ill, Michael Thomas. The doctors said he needs urgent surgery or else... She didn't finish the sentence, but Michael Thomas understood. After a lifetime separated from his biological father, there was now a real chance of losing him forever. How much does this surgery cost? $50,000, Margaret replied. It's a lot of money for us, but I know for you... It's not about the money, Michael Thomas interrupted. It's about the lost time. Over 40 years I can't get back. They sat in silence for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden light that made the old house look almost magical. Margaret, I want to buy this land, he finally said. But I won't pay a symbolic amount. I'll pay what it's really worth. You don't have to. Yes, I do. And I'll also pay for Robert's surgery. But in return, I want the truth, the whole truth. No more secrets between us. Margaret nodded, visibly relieved. But Michael Thomas could see in her eyes that there were still things she hadn't told him. Is there anything else I should know before I meet my father? Yes, she said after a long pause. You had a brother. The world seemed to stop around Michael Thomas. After discovering the existence of a father and an aunt, now there was also a brother. Had. What happened to him? Catherine was pregnant with twins, Margaret explained. But you were the only one strong enough to survive. The other baby, he didn't make it. And you never told me. Robert thought it would be too painful for you to know. He always said you already carried enough weight having lost your mother. Michael Thomas sat down again, trying to process this new information. The idea that he'd had a twin brother created a sense of emptiness he couldn't explain. What would his name have been? William, Margaret answered. Robert chose both names before the birth. Michael Thomas and William Walker. At that moment, Michael Thomas remembered something that had always puzzled him. All his life, he'd felt a strange sense of incompleteness, as if something essential were missing. Now he understood where that feeling came from. I want to see my father now, he said, standing up. I can't wait any longer. But it's getting late and the nursing home has visiting hour. Margaret, I'm Michael Thomas Anderson. I buy and sell entire office buildings. Believe me, they'll open the doors for us. On the way to Naperville, Michael Thomas called his secretary and cancelled all his appointments for the next few days. He also instructed his accountant to prepare a transfer of $100,000 to Margaret, an amount he calculated was fair for the land, plus the cost of the surgery. You don't have to do this, Margaret said when he told her the amount. Yes, I do. You lost a lot of money all those years keeping this secret. It's time to make up for it. When they arrived at the nursing home, Michael Thomas felt a chill in his stomach. The place was simple but clean and well kept. Margaret spoke to a nurse, explaining the situation. Mr. Robert is in room 15, said the nurse, but I should warn you, he hasn't spoken much since the stroke. Some days are good, some aren't. Michael Thomas paused at the door of the room, taking a deep breath. On the other side of that door was the man who had fathered him, who had spent over 40 years wondering about the son he'd had to give up. When he entered the room, he saw a man around 70 years old, thin with graying hair, sleeping in a simple bed. Even with age and the weakness from the stroke, Michael Thomas could recognize some of his own features in that man's face. Robert, Mrs. Margaret said softly, Robert, there's someone here who wants to meet you. The man opened his eyes slowly, clearly confused by the timing of the visit. When his gaze met Michael Thomas's, he seemed to grow more alert. Who is this young man, Margaret? Robert asked, his voice weak but still clear. Michael Thomas stepped closer to the bed, feeling an emotion he couldn't control. "My name is Michael Thomas," he said, extending his hand. "Michael Thomas Walker." The effect of those words on Robert was immediate. His eyes filled with tears, and he tried to sit up in bed. "It can't be," he murmured. "My son? My boy?" "It's me, Dad," Michael Thomas said, the word Dad leaving his lips for the first time in reference to Robert. Robert reached out with trembling hands toward Michael Thomas's face, as if wanting to make sure this wasn't a dream. When he touched his son's face, he began to sob uncontrollably. "I knew," he said between gasps. "I always knew you'd come back to me." Michael Thomas held his father's hands, and in that moment, he felt a connection he had never experienced with Richard Anderson. It was as if a part of his soul that had always been empty was finally filled. "Dad, I'm so sorry for all the lost time," he said. "No, my son, don't be sorry. You're here now. That's all that matters." They talked for hours. Robert told stories about Catherine, about how they met, about the dreams they had for a future that never came. Michael Thomas spoke about his life, his achievements, but also about the emptiness he had always felt. "I always knew something was missing," Michael Thomas admitted. "Now I understand what it was." "And your mother? What was she like?" Robert asked, referring to Barbara Anderson. Michael Thomas hesitated. Telling Robert about how he was raised was complicated, especially now knowing that the Andersons had actively prevented any contact between them. "She gave me a good education," he finally said, "but there was never the same warmth I see in your eyes now." Robert smiled through his tears. "Catherine always said you'd have intelligent eyes just like hers, and she was right." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Over the following days, Michael Thomas visited Robert every day. With each conversation, he learned more about his roots, about the Walker family, about traditions and stories he never knew existed. Robert had an impressive memory for certain details, especially when it came to Catherine. He told how she used to sing to her belly during the pregnancy, how they chose the names Michael Thomas and William based on stars they'd seen together on a clear night. "Your mother said you two would be special," Robert shared during one visit. "She believed Michael Thomas would be the name of someone important, someone who'd make a difference in the world. And William? William would be the protector. She said the two of you together would be unstoppable." These conversations left Michael Thomas with a bittersweet feeling. On one hand, it was comforting to finally know his origins. On the other hand, the pain of having lost so much time was almost unbearable. It was during one of these visits that Robert mentioned something that would completely change Michael Thomas's perspective on his situation. "Son, I kept some things from your mother," said Robert. "They're with Margaret in a suitcase under her bed." "What kind of things?" "Letters she wrote to you before giving birth, clothes she sewed, and a few other keepsakes." Michael Thomas felt an urgency to see these items. It was as if each new discovery brought him closer to a mother he had never known, and a past that had been denied to him. That same night, he visited the modest house where Margaret lived. It was a humble place, but clean and well kept. Margaret welcomed him with a home-cooked meal, and for the first time, Michael Thomas tasted food made by someone from his biological family. "These are recipes your mother learned from our grandmother," explained Margaret as they served the food. "Catherine was an excellent cook." After dinner, Margaret brought out an old suitcase, its brown leather worn by time. When she opened it, Michael Thomas saw tiny clothes, clearly handmade, and a few sealed envelopes. "Catherine made these clothes during her pregnancy," Margaret explained. "She embroidered both your names on each piece." Michael Thomas picked up one of the small shirts and saw his name stitched in blue thread. It was delicate work, done with so much love and care. "And these letters. She wrote a letter for every year of your life until you turned 18, said Margaret. "The idea was that you'd receive a letter from her on your birthday, even after she was gone." Michael Thomas felt a lump in his throat. His birth mother had planned to be present in his life in a way he had never imagined possible. "Can I read them?" "Of course, they're yours." He took the first letter, addressed to his 5-year-old self, and began to read. My dear Michael Thomas, today you turn 5. I know I'm not there to see you blow out the candles on your cake, but I want you to know that my love for you is stronger than any distance. At this age, you must be curious about everything. I hope you're a happy child, that you play a lot, and that you always remember to be kind to others. If you're reading this, it's because Daddy kept these letters as he promised. One day, when you're older, he'll tell you our love story and how you were planned and wanted. You have a little brother in heaven who will always watch over you. His name is William, and he's here with me, waiting for the day our family will be together again. Always be brave, my love. With all my heart, Mom, Catherine. Tears streamed freely down Michael Thomas's face as he read the letter. It was as if his mother was speaking directly to him across the decades. Margaret, I have a very important question, he said, lifting his head. All those years you received money from the Andersons, did they know about these letters? No, she replied. These letters were our secret. Robert made me promise that one day you'd get them, even if it took a lifetime. And why did you never try to reach out to me directly, without going through the Andersons? Margaret hesitated, and Michael Thomas sensed there was another part of the story he still didn't know. We tried once, she finally said. When you were 15, Robert was in good health back then, and we decided to break the agreement with the Andersons. What happened? We went to your school, waited for you to come out. When you were walking down the street, Robert approached you and said he was your father. Michael Thomas tried to remember that moment but couldn't. I don't recall that. You got scared, thought Robert was crazy. You started shouting for help. When the Andersons found out, they came to us. And what did they say? Richard Anderson was very clear. He said if we tried to contact you again, they'd call the police and fabricate a story that we were trying to extort them. Michael Thomas felt the anger rise again. The Andersons' manipulation had gone even deeper than he'd imagined. They also increased the monthly payment, Margaret continued, and said that as long as we kept our distance, you'd have the best life possible. And you believed them. We had no choice, she said, her voice full of regret. Robert fell into depression after that. He said he'd failed as a father once again. Michael Thomas stood and walked to the window of the small room. Outside, he could see the houses of other neighbors, the simple lives of hard-working people. It was a world completely different from what he knew, but there was something genuine there that he'd always felt was missing in his life. Margaret, I'm going to confront the Andersons, he said. They need to know I've discovered everything. Are you sure? They're still your parents in a way. They raised you, gave you an education. They lied to me for 43 years, Michael Thomas replied, and kept me from knowing my real family. That's not love. That's control. What if they get angry? What if they try to hurt you somehow? Michael Thomas smiled for the first time in days. Margaret, I've learned to play their game. I have my own lawyers, my own company. They can't control me anymore. The next morning, Michael Thomas went to the Andersons' home. It was a mansion in the Gold Coast, Chicago, where he'd grown up. When he arrived, he was greeted by Barbara, who seemed surprised by his unexpected visit. Michael Thomas, how nice to see you. I wasn't expecting you today, she said, kissing his cheek. Your father's in the office. Should I call him? Actually, Mom, I need to talk to both of you. It's important. Barbara seemed to notice something different in his tone. She called Richard, and the three of them sat in the luxurious living room Michael Thomas had known since childhood. What's going on, son? Richard asked. You seem upset. Michael Thomas took a deep breath and decided to be direct. I found out the truth about my adoption, he said, and how you kept me from meeting my birth family. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard and Barbara exchanged a look that mixed surprise and fear. What are you talking about? Barbara asked, but her voice was clearly strained. I'm talking about Robert Walker and Margaret Walker. I'm talking about the monthly payments you made to them for over 40 years. I'm talking about the letters you intercepted. Richard stood from his chair, visibly nervous. Michael Thomas, who told you these things? Does it matter? What matters is whether it's true or not. Richard and Barbara exchanged another glance, and Michael Thomas knew they were deciding how much of the truth to reveal. Fine, Richard finally said. It's true. We paid them to stay away, but we did it to protect you. Protect me from what? From that life, Barbara answered quickly. Michael Thomas, have you seen where they live? What kind of life would you have had with them? An honest life, Michael Thomas shot back, his anger growing. A life with people who truly loved me, not out of obligation or to feed your egos. We loved you, Barbara protested. We gave you everything you have today. You gave me things, Michael Thomas corrected. Education, money, opportunities. But you never gave me the truth. You never gave me the right to choose to know my family. Richard tried a different approach. Son, you need to understand that we did what we thought was best. You've become a successful man. You have a thriving business. And that justifies the lies. They weren't lies, said Barbara. They were protections. Michael Thomas laughed bitterly. Protections. You intercepted letters from my biological father. You paid my family to stay away. You denied me the right to know my own story. And what are you going to do now? Asked Richard, his tone beginning to sound threatening. I'm going to meet my family, replied Michael Thomas, standing up. I'll make up for lost time, and I'll honor the memory of my biological mother. If you do that, don't count on us, said Barbara, also standing. We won't accept being publicly humiliated because of those people. So that's how you see it? As humiliation? Michael Thomas, we invested our entire lives in you, said Richard. We gave you our name, our reputation. If you publicly acknowledge that family, you'll tarnish our image. At that moment, Michael Thomas had absolute clarity about who the Andersons really were. They weren't loving parents who had made mistakes. They were controlling, selfish people who saw his adoption as an investment that should pay off. You're worried about image? He asked. My biological father needs surgery to save his life, and you're worried about image? That's not our problem, Richard said coldly. No, Michael Thomas agreed. It's not your problem, it's mine. And I'll handle it. He headed for the door but turned around one last time before leaving. All these years, I wondered why I never felt completely connected to you. Now I understand. You're not capable of real love. You only know how to possess. He left the Andersons' house knowing he would probably never return. There was a mix of sadness and relief in his heart. Sadness for losing the only parents he had known for most of his life. Relief for finally being free to be who he truly was. Over the following weeks, Michael Thomas organized all the necessary paperwork for Robert's surgery. He also hired the best private doctors to oversee the case. The surgery was a success, and Robert began to recover gradually. During his recovery, Michael Thomas spent nearly every day at the hospital, talking to his father and learning more about his family. It was during one of these conversations that Robert mentioned something that piqued Michael Thomas's curiosity. Son, there's something your mother left for you besides the letters, said Robert. What is it? An embroidery. She made it during her pregnancy, said it was to protect you and William. Where is this embroidery? Margaret keeps it. It's a beautiful piece with both your names and some words your mother chose. Michael Thomas felt a strange familiarity with this story. His entire life, he had carried a small embroidery that Barbara Anderson claimed she had made for him as a baby. He had never questioned its origin, but now. Dad, what does this embroidery look like? Robert described exactly the embroidery Michael Thomas had carried in his wallet for years. The same colors, the same pattern, the same size. Can you ask Margaret to bring it here? Michael Thomas requested. When Margaret arrived at the hospital the next day, she brought a small box. Inside was an embroidery identical to the one Michael Thomas carried, except for one detail. This one had two names embroidered, Michael Thomas and William. I don't understand, said Michael Thomas. How did the Andersons get the embroidery? They didn't, Margaret explained. Catherine made two identical embroideries, one with both names, which stayed with me, and another one with just your name, which went with you to the adoptive family. Michael Thomas took the embroidered piece he had carried for years out of his wallet and placed it next to the one Margaret had brought. They were clearly made by the same person, with the same care and attention to detail. Your mother wanted to make sure you always carried a part of her with you, said Robert, moved, even without knowing who she was. At that moment, Michael Thomas felt a connection to his birth mother he had never experienced before. All these years, he had carried a part of her with him without realizing it. Did the Andersons know where the embroidery came from? "We told them it was a tradition from your birth family," Margaret replied. "They agreed to give it to you but insisted it was a gift from them." Another lie from the Andersons, another way to control and manipulate his story. In the following weeks, as Robert recovered, Michael Thomas made some important decisions. First, he legally changed his name, adding Walker to his surname. Now he was Michael Thomas Anderson Walker, honoring both the family who raised him and the one who brought him into the world. Second, he decided to invest part of his fortune in projects that would benefit the community where Robert and Margaret lived. It wasn't charity, it was family responsibility. Third, he began regularly visiting the house where Catherine had been born and died. The property Margaret had tried to sell became a gathering place for the Walker family. One day, as Michael Thomas walked the grounds with Robert, who was almost fully recovered, his father made a remark that stayed with him deeply. "You know, son, your mother always said you'd come home when you were ready," Robert said. "She believed true love always finds a way." "And she was right," Michael Thomas replied. "It just took me 43 years to understand where my real home was." They decided to restore the old house, turning it into a place where future generations of the Walker family could gather. Michael Thomas hired architects and builders, but insisted on preserving every original detail. During the renovation, they found more surprises. On a kitchen wall, they discovered handwritten recipes by Catherine. In an old cabinet, they found more photographs of the Walker family over the years. Each discovery brought Michael Thomas closer to his roots. Margaret taught him the family's traditional recipes. Robert told stories about grandparents Michael Thomas had never met. Slowly, he was filling the gaps of a lifetime. It was during one of these visits to the house that Michael Thomas met someone who would change his perspective on family even more. A white-haired lady appeared on the property, introducing herself as Elizabeth, Catherine's cousin. "I heard Catherine's son had finally come home," she said, hugging Michael Thomas warmly. "Your mother talked about you so much during her pregnancy." Elizabeth was 82 with an incredible memory. She remembered details about Catherine even Robert didn't know. "Your mother sang to you and William every night," Elizabeth said. "She made up songs about what you'd be like when you grew up. Do you remember any of those songs?" Elizabeth smiled and began humming a soft, beautiful melody. The words told of two boys who would be strong and kind, who would look after each other and bring joy to the world. Michael Thomas felt a deep emotion hearing that song. It was as if his mother were there, singing to him through Elizabeth's voice. "Catherine also left a diary," Elizabeth said. "I've kept it all these years, waiting for someone in the family to come and claim it." Catherine's diary was an incredible discovery. In it, she had documented her entire pregnancy, her dreams for her children, her fears and hopes. Reading those pages was like talking to her mother for the first time. One of the diary entries particularly caught Michael Thomas Anderson's attention. "Today I felt the boys moving a lot. It seems like Michael Thomas is protecting William, always placing his little hand over him. Robert said this means he'll be a caring brother. I hope they always stay close, even if life separates them." The irony of that entry was painful. Michael Thomas had spent his whole life feeling like something was missing, unaware that it was precisely this connection with William that he had lost before even being born. In the following months, the house was completely restored. Michael Thomas made sure every room honored Catherine's memory and the Walker family's history. The main living room was decorated with family photographs spanning generations. The kitchen was equipped with utensils to prepare Catherine's traditional recipes. The room meant for the children was turned into a memorial for William. Michael Thomas placed there the embroidery with both names, some of the clothes Catherine had made for both sons, and a small wooden cradle Robert had built during the pregnancy. When the renovation was finished, they threw a party to gather all the Walker family members they could find. Margaret, Robert, Elizabeth, and over 20 other relatives Michael Thomas never knew existed. It was an emotional evening, filled with stories, home-cooked food and music. Michael Thomas finally felt part of something bigger than himself. For the first time in his life, he was at a gathering where he didn't need to impress anyone or keep up appearances. He could simply be Michael Thomas Walker. During the party, Robert gave a speech that deeply moved everyone present. "Today our family is whole again," he said, tears in his eyes. "Catherine always said true love never dies. It just waits for the right moment to show itself. My son Michael Thomas is proof she was right." Michael Thomas stood to respond to his father's speech. "For 43 years, I lived in a family that gave me everything except the most important thing, the truth," he said. "Today, I'm in a family that gives me the only thing that truly matters, genuine love." When the party ended and everyone had left, Michael Thomas, Robert and Margaret stayed alone in the house. They sat on the porch gazing at the stars and reflecting on everything that had happened. "Son, there's something I've always wanted to ask you," Robert said. "Do you regret anything?" Michael Thomas thought for a moment before answering. "I regret the lost time," he said, "but I don't regret anything I learned or achieved during those years. All of it brought me to you." "What about the Andersons?" Margaret asked. "Do you still talk to them?" "No," Michael Thomas replied. "They made it very clear they don't approve of my choices, and I made it clear I no longer need their approval." "But they're still the ones who raised you," Margaret insisted. "Maybe with time—" "Margaret, there are two kinds of family," Michael Thomas interrupted. "The family that raises us and the family that accepts us. The Andersons raised me, but they only accepted me as long as I met their expectations. You accept me for who I am." That night, Michael Thomas slept for the first time in the house where his mother had been born and where he had been conceived. It was a deep, restorative sleep, as if he had finally found his place in the world. In the following months, Michael Thomas settled into a new routine. During the week, he worked in Chicago, managing his business. On weekends, he came to the Walker family home, spending time with Robert and Margaret. This new dynamic brought significant changes to his professional life as well. Michael Thomas began investing in projects that benefited underprivileged communities, something he had never considered before. He also changed his approach to business. Instead of simply seeking maximum profit, he started considering the human impact of his decisions. This new approach, interestingly enough, made his businesses even more prosperous. It was during this time that he met Jennifer, a social worker who worked in one of the communities he had invested in. She was a 40-year-old woman with a genuine smile and an evident passion for helping others. "You're different from the other businessmen I've met," she said during a conversation about a community project. "Most of them do charity for marketing. You seem to genuinely care." "I've recently learned that money without purpose is worthless," Michael Thomas replied. "And that family isn't about blood or money. It's about love and acceptance." Jennifer grew curious about this philosophy, and Michael Thomas ended up sharing his story. She was fascinated by the journey of self-discovery he had gone through. "It must have been very hard to find out your whole life was based on a lie," she remarked. "It was," Michael Thomas admitted, "but it was also liberating. I finally understood why I always felt incomplete." The relationship between Michael Thomas and Jennifer gradually deepened. He took her to meet Robert and Margaret, who welcomed her with immediate warmth and approval. "This young woman has a good heart," Robert said to Michael Thomas after Jennifer left. "She's not interested in your money, she's interested in you. How do you know?" "Because she looks at you the same way Catherine used to look at me," Robert replied, smiling, "with real love." Michael Thomas realized his father was right. Jennifer was the first person in his life who loved him for who he truly was, not for his social status or wealth. A year after reconciling with the Walker family, Michael Thomas made a decision that surprised everyone. He proposed to Jennifer in the house where his mother had been born. The proposal was simple and heartfelt. During a family dinner, he stood up and began speaking about how he had found his true identity in that place. "Jennifer, it was here that I learned what real love is," he said, kneeling. "And it's here that I want to start our family. Will you marry me?" Jennifer said yes, and the impromptu celebration that followed was one of the happiest nights of Michael Thomas's life. Robert played the guitar, Margaret cooked for everyone, and Elizabeth shared old family stories. The wedding took place 6 months later, also on the Walker family property. It was a small but deeply meaningful ceremony. Michael Thomas wore Catherine's embroidery on the pocket of his suit jacket, a way of keeping his mother present for the most important moment of his life. During the ceremony, the priest said something that moved Michael Thomas deeply. True love knows no boundaries of time or space. The love Catherine felt for Michael Thomas over 40 years ago is here today, uniting not just Michael Thomas and Jennifer, but this entire family that has found its way back together. After the wedding, Michael Thomas and Jennifer established a tradition. Every week they had dinner at the Walker family home, keeping Catherine's recipes and stories alive. It was during one of these dinners that something unforgettable happened. Jennifer announced she was pregnant. "We're having twins," she said, tears of joy in her eyes. The silence that followed was absolute. Robert began to cry. Margaret pressed her hands to her chest, and Michael Thomas felt an emotion he couldn't explain. "Twins," he repeated, still processing the news. "Yes," Jennifer confirmed. "2 boys." Robert slowly rose from his chair and walked over to Michael Thomas. "My son, your mother is sending William back to you," he said, embracing Michael Thomas. "The family will finally be complete." At that moment, Michael Thomas understood his journey had reached its end. For 43 years he had felt something was missing. Now, with his true family by his side and the promise of a new generation, he finally felt whole. The twins were born 9 months later, on a sunny morning. Michael Thomas cradled them in his arms and whispered the names he had chosen, William and Robert, in honor of the brother he never knew and the father he had reunited with. "Catherine would be so proud," said Margaret, gazing at the babies. "The Walker family will carry on." Michael Thomas looked at his children in his arms, then at Jennifer, at Robert, at Margaret. In that moment, he realized he had discovered something more valuable than all the money in the world. He had discovered who he truly was and where he truly belonged. The house that had nearly been sold out of desperation had become the heart of a new love story. The walls that had witnessed Catherine's birth now witnessed the birth of a new generation. And on that land that held so many secrets, Michael Thomas had finally found the one thing he had always searched for, a place where he could simply be himself, loved and accepted unconditionally. The end of the story. Now tell me what you thought of this touching story and where you're following us from. Leave your heartfelt thoughts in the comments about Michael Thomas's journey to finding his true family. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more moving stories like this one.